Hi, I'm Othais, and this is another Spencer shotgun, though we should now call it the Bannerman model of 1890. It represents an attempt by a famous surplus reseller to enter the world of manufacture. More on that, of course, after we get it in the light box. Like last time, we managed a 30-inch barrel, though now we have a 48 3/4 of an inch overall length, thanks to a slightly shorter stock. The weight in this configuration is still rounded out to 8.1 pounds. This, like all of production, is 12 gauge, with 5 cartridges in the tubular magazine underneath the barrel. Still a pump action, still a tipping block, and still no rapid loading. Fun fact, early smokeless powders were also very hygroscopic, meaning that they suck up moisture from the air easily. In the shotgun world, that meant that they failed frequently and suffered hangfire, so these old guns tended to run a lot of black powder regardless of whether they were ready for smokeless or not. And you know what's great for cleaning up black powder? That's right, the show-supporting Do Anything oil, Ballistol. I happily used both their oil and their bore snakes to quickly and effectively clean up our mess after firing these shotguns for this episode. Give it a try yourself. If that's too tall of an order, consider scrounging around your couch cushions for exactly $1. Because for just one of those a month, you can directly fund C&Rsenal, meaning shows like this one. The great majority of our budget comes from our generous viewers like yourself. Last episode, we discussed the history and development of the Spencer repeating shotgun, which was named for Christopher Minor Spencer, famed inventor of the Civil War repeating rifles and carbines. Though in this case, he wasn't the only one to contribute. It seems the gestalt was laid down by Sylvester Roper, best known in the firearms world for his earlier revolving shotguns. These were unfortunately poor sellers, and the company folded. Years later, however, he and Spencer tried again. They were joined by an employee of the Billings and Spencer firm, Richard Rhodes, and received help from Superintendent Joseph Frazier. Together with investors, they created the Spencer Arms Company in 1883. Some early efforts were placed on selling a rifle adaptation of their invention. This sadly failed, both in the US and abroad. So by 1884, their chief focus and their sold product was the Spencer slide-action shotgun. This underwent minor changes, ultimately evolving into the model of 1887, all of which we saw in our last episode. Despite failures with the rifle, once Spencer shotguns entered serial production, samples were sent to U.S. Ordnance, because, as always, a large government contract beats out chasing thousands of individual sales. An example began testing on January 6 of 1886. The results were thankfully recorded in a March 1886 edition of the Army and Navy Journal. It appears that the shotgun tested was of full length. There is no mention of it being a riot configuration, though the barrel length is not specifically mentioned. I suspect, however, that it was, like this one, 30 inches. The cartridge used was 12-gauge buckshot, 9 balls. Average weight of the charge was 509 grains. These were paper-cased, 2 5/8 inch long, though some full metallic cases were also tried. The testing procedures should seem familiar to those of you who have watched this show so many times before. Basic shooting, purposely sabotaged ammo testing, be it overcharged or with the cases cut through to weaken them. Happily, despite some gas escape from the worst of the cartridges, none of it was directed back at the shooter, by the way. Rapidity of fire, unaimed, resulted in a best time of 22 shots in 1 minute. Rapidity of fire aimed at a 6x2 target only 100 feet away saw a best time of 26 rounds fired in 1 minute, so even faster, and 140 hits were recorded on the target out of 234 possible projectiles fired. It's worth mentioning that reloading must have been fairly quick, as 4 rounds were still in the magazine when that minute was up. Rapidity of fire unaimed as a single loader resulted in 18 shots in 1 minute. Penetration testing at 100 feet, with pine boards 1 inch thick, each about an inch apart, most of the shot passed through 2 boards and embedded in the third. Fine dust did not disturb the action, though the ammo itself sometimes became stuck. The shotgun was degreased, soaked in sal ammoniac, and exposed to open air for 2 days to rust. It was found to be perfectly serviceable afterwards. This test was later repeated with more severity, causing the action to stick at first, but once forced open, it would work well enough, if a bit sticky. Some light endurance testing was done, as 7 shooters each took 1 minute to work through as many rounds as they could for aimed fire. They averaged 10.7 shots a minute, with an average hit rate of 80%. Now all this went very well, but some additional testing was tried specific to the Spencer. The first was to check for damage to the cartridges that were being tested in the magazine tube while the gun was fired. These were found to be fine. That means, boom, and maybe it shook the balls a little loose. The second proved to be very wise, as they soaked the paper cartridges and attempted to feed them through the action. This was a complete failure. What a surprise. Overall, however, the shotgun performed extremely well. 10 defective shells were noted, but no failures of the action itself. Except for one recurring problem, that is. This same problem was actually noted in the earlier Spencer Lee rifle trials. When any of these pump guns were operated in a hurry, shooters of all experience level would repeatedly get out of sequence between pumping and shooting, and inevitably kick out some live rounds. That aside, they were highly effective and recommended for the service. That should have been great for the Spencer Arms firm, but the U.S. Army wasn't a heavy user of shotguns. Known orders would only total 354 units, with the bulk purchased in April of 1886 and some trickling support in 1887 and 1888. Another medium-sized order came in 1893, but as we'll see, that was too little, too late. That last order, by the way, seems to coincide with a report by one First Lieutenant Frederick Perkins stating that the Spencer shotguns were acquired to replace the Parkers and English guns, presumably double barrels, that were then in use with the military prison facilities. It honestly seems that this was the true bulk of the Spencer's service. I can find no reference to them being used otherwise. Interestingly, these were not riot-length barrels. Instead, known examples seem to range between 30 and 32 inches long, a strange length for what was to be a guard's shotgun for sure. So perhaps there is some as yet undiscovered use in foraging or the like. Regardless, a guard isn't likely to be armed with birdshot, so I think it's worth demonstrating this same shotgun again, now loaded with the 9-pellet buckshot cartridges. Oh, that seems very effective. Too bad the US government didn't agree that it was worth the expense. Because by late 1899, the Spencer Arms Company was in jeopardy. Sales were just too slow to meet their debts, most notably those to Pratt and Whitney, who held a lien on most of the tooling and, of course, the machinery. As Spencer Arms began missing payments, it came time to collect on those assets. However, through a means not entirely known to us today, this debt was sold by Pratt and Whitney to one Francis Bannerman VI. Born March 24, 1851 in Dundee, Scotland, to Francis V and Margaret McWalter, Francis Bannerman's father moved the family to the US in October of 1854, staying briefly in New Jersey before residence was established in Brooklyn by 1856. While working various jobs, Francis the Elder made good money selling surplus odds and ends salvaged or bought around the Brooklyn Navy Yard. In 1861, however, he joined the Union Army during the United States Civil War. This left 10-year-old Francis as the eldest of 3 children and the man of the house. So he dropped out of school and took a job at a lawyer's office. He also sold newspapers to officers at the Brooklyn Navy Yard each morning. There, he soon found quite a bit of waste, plenty of materials to be dredged up or even found floating around the naval yard. So the family business of scrounging and selling was carried on. Happily, his father did survive the war, though he returned wounded. So they would actually choose to work together. And by 1867, they had a family store with father running the shop and son doing most of the digging. Our young man even managed to return to school for a while, earning a scholarship for Cornell University, though he could not accept it as his father needed him at the business, which had now expanded into a ship chandlery as well. Now 21 years of age, Fancis was sent to Ireland to buy rope, which was in short supply back at home. This is actually when he met his wife, Helen Boyce. Sadly, though, his father died at just 51 years of age the very next year. Mother took up the chandlery, young Fancis ran the junk business and sold produce as well. He was soon attending U.S. government auctions in order to buy up goods for scrapping or reworking for sale. At some point, he saw the wasteful way obsoleted arms were sold off, like so much of the same scrap. He felt it better to buy these large lots and break them up into singular units, marketing and selling them at a small profit over and over and over again in large volume. Specific to firearms, over time, Bannerman began to buy surplus obsolete rifles and have them converted to more useful fowling pieces and boys' guns. By 1890, the business had grown, now established in 3 locations, all still in Brooklyn. In May of that same year, Bannerman, now holding Spencer Arms debt, foreclosed on the manufacturing equipment. The court found that Spencer Arms owed Bannerman $19,328.41. In lieu of payment, they surrendered all of their patent interests, all tooling and equipment for the production of the Spencer shotguns, and all parts in production. This ended both Roper and Spencer's involvement in these shotguns, at least their sale. Sylvester Roper went on to focus famously on steam-powered vehicles, specifically pioneering the motorcycle. Sadly, he even passed away riding a steam-powered bicycle in a race in 1896. Christopher Spencer returned to machinery. Also fascinated with steam power, he was more of a tinkerer, spending much of his time with his family, until his death in 1922. With essentially the assembly line itself in his hands, Bannerman just needed a factory, as the Windsor, Connecticut building had been leased from someone else. He didn't own that. So operations were moved to 1556 Bergen Street, Brooklyn, New York. Initially, it seems some shotguns were assembled from available parts, but very quickly a new model appeared. Actually, that would be this one right here, the Bannerman Spencer model of 1890. The changes are fairly minor, but since I have an example here, let's get a look. All right, long shotgun, and at the back, pretty much the same, although we have a metal butt plate on this example, and I will say there's a sort of faint checkering left through here that I have seen on a number of 1890s. I'm not sure what option that was. It doesn't look like it was done very deep. It's almost always all but imperceivable like it is on this gun. As we go forward, same trigger and hammer spur, same breech block. Our side plate has actually gotten a little smaller. And we have, well, look at this, F Bannerman, MNFR, I'm going to go with manufacturer, New York, USA, model 1890. So no confusion on this one. This is, of course, the example we used last episode to show you the cross key, so that's the way this one's set up. And then, as you probably noticed, but we didn't discuss, this has the hardened rubber front end that is much larger than the original. Comparing to the original, it's much longer, it's actually a little thinner, and they tend to wear out faster. I'm not sure why, but most are worn down like this, whereas the originals tend to actually still be fairly sharp and still have their deep checkering. Construction's also slightly different in that there's 2 external screws, one on this side and one on the other, holding the original on. And then this guy's just a sleeve fitted over, any attachment is internal. Now, this pump I'm pretty confident on being correct for the 1890, but it is a bit of sticky history. Here's the thing, almost every time I find an image of a model 1890 marked Spencer, it has this foregrip design. However, the 2 best resources that I have found on these guns are very unclear on this matter. One basically doesn't explain the 1890 slide in detail, and the other says it just reused the original short rubber grips of the Spencer production line. To date, I haven't seen an 1890 with that short grip, but I've only seen a few regardless. Bannerman's parts advertising only refers to the following: a Model 1894 wooden handle, beautifully shaped; a Model 1896 handle, available originally in hard rubber or later the same pattern in wood as they frequently broke. Following this, a later pattern 1896 corncob style of grip was used on these shotguns. This image from the July 1895 issue of Recreation magazine depicts a display by Bannerman. While the resolution is low, you can clearly see each gun sports a longer grip, likely made of hard rubber. Two examples on the left also seem like they might have the 1894 tapered wood grip. Bannerman did advertise a model of 1894, though no known examples exist, with Model 1894 written on the receiver. Perhaps this was just a reference to the improved wooden grip? I suspect this mystery is a job for someone with enough time to do the survey work. All mysteries of the Model 1890 and the never-found model of 1894 aside, Bannerman seems to have actually been doing much better in his sales of the shotgun than Spencer had. By 1893, production had already exceeded everything put out by the Spencer Arms by at least twofold, if not three. While it wasn't yet a fortune maker, the concept of a magazine-fed pump-action shotgun was finally catching on. As we know in hindsight, this would become the default for over a century to come. The future was finally looking bright for the Spencer slide action. That is, until Winchester, along with John Moses Browning, decided to interfere with Bannerman's plans, introducing their model of 1893 magazine-repeating shotgun and finally leaving their lever obsession behind. Bannerman quite rightly believed, however, that the Browning gun was in violation of his Spencer and Roper slide-action patents. He demanded a halt to the production, and when that failed, he filed suit against Winchester's agent in New York. What followed was one of the more famous legal battles in firearms history. The obvious infringement was Browning's slide-action tipping block shotgun. Even though it did include a number of novel ideas, at its heart, it was built on the same notion as the Spencer. Bannerman's lawyers also targeted Winchester's .22 caliber model of 1890 pump-action rifle. This was somewhat less similar than the 1893, but they still felt it violated elements of the slide-action patent. In theory, Bannerman had a lot of ammunition. The original Spencer and Roper patent was granted in 1882. At that time, it was granted 17 years protection, so ending in 1899. Then there was the Rhodes patent, which protected the simple cartridge stop. And then there was the Roper patent of 1885, never put into production, but using a linear bolt. Just as a reminder, that would be this setup, with the magazine over the barrel. Strangely enough, this was the patent Bannerman's lawyers took to court, all but ignoring the others. This was likely because it would give the longest additional protection at that time, if successfully defended. The trial was held in June of 1895. By then, the Model 1893 Winchester was well into production. The thrust of Winchester's defense was that the slide-action concept at play was already well established before the Roper patent. They put together some notable examples. The eldest of these is a British patent dated back to 1854, granted to Alexander Bain. The rifle covered was frankly astounding, a slide-operated, double-barreled harmonica gun. Though the method of operation wasn't quite as lovely as the later Spencer. Instead of a large grip, it sported a somewhat odd hook. Next was the William Curtis patent, again British and now granted in 1866. This trombone-like slide action is perhaps an even wilder design, given that it is also a fairly extreme bullpup rifle, perhaps the earliest known. That same year, William Crutch received a patent on his slide-action rifle, which was gear-operated and used a sort of flapping breech. Again, an extremely complex arm. The final foreign patent came from France in 1880. This was Jean-Baptiste Magot's. Bannerman's team contested that these were unworkably complex designs, way too fiddly to be actually produced. Winchester's response was quite dramatic. They had acquired a Magot rifle and had constructed the Curtis and the Crutch. All of these, by the way, can now be seen at the Cody Firearms Museum at the Buffalo Bill Center for the West. Each rifle was shown to actually work, and obviously the slide action was not a novel idea. However, these were all foreign patents, so despite the circus, it seems they were not so critical to the decision of the court. Wasn't there anything that they could point to in the US? Well, yeah. And Bannerman's team handed it right to them. The original Spencer and Roper patent wasn't the one they were policing, so it was instead prior art. Under testimony, it was also revealed that Roper's 1885 design was actually developed earlier than the slide action we know today. He simply held off patenting until later. This didn't necessarily have any legal bearing, but it is rather interesting. It does kind of poison the well a bit. So Spencer and Roper's earlier patent canceled out Roper's later one. This would make sense, except Roper is the same man, and both patents were owned by Bannerman now. The matter should really have just moved to consider the earlier patent, but unfortunately this whole lawsuit came at a very bad time for Bannerman. Back in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act had been adopted into law. This was in direct response to the public's dismay at various trusts like Standard Oil, which were seen as forcing higher market prices. Part of this ire was also directed at patent holders, who were felt to have been allowed to lock down swaths of emerging technology for nearly 2 decades at a time. Given the escalating rate of advancement in that era, it's not actually an unfair concern. With this as the backdrop, the courts were not as inclined to side with a patent holder. And in June of 1897, Bannerman lost his case, though he did appeal. In the meantime, however, the product was still being improved. I actually have the results here. The model of 1896, which has a better slide handle. The 1896 isn't all that different, especially at the rear, although I don't tend to see any checkering here on these guns. We still have a metal butt plate on this example, but maybe not all of them. You guys get the idea here. The action's all the same. One minor improvement is that there's actually a little fingernail notch there for these sliders. Okay, I'll take it. Still have the cross-block drift like we saw on our other example. And as we come forward, well, let's focus on this grip for just a moment. Or maybe some of the things around it, actually, because, quickly, the magazine tube construction has definitely changed by now. This seems to be a wrapped pressed steel piece. You can see the ridges for strength instead of the mandrel tube, the formed tube that we saw before. Interestingly, now, we tend to see a wire wrap barrel, wire twist barrel, which was similar to the wire twist of the magazine tube from before. The gun I had out earlier, the 1890, by the way, if anybody's curious, it had what looked like a fluid steel barrel, which means no sort of markings at all, no Damascus, no wire twist. It tends to go back and forth with these guns at this point. I'm not really sure of what options were available when people purchased. Now, the construction of the pump as a whole has changed regardless of even just the wood pattern. We have, at this point, by the way, this sort of two-piece construction where we have this wraparound arm, there's a metal insert you could probably barely make out, that runs through, and there's a cap that then retains this whole wood piece. The wood piece itself is very bulky, it's a very good grip, much stronger and less likely to be damaged. You rarely see these damaged, actually. This is very smart compared to the, frankly, very fragile natural rubbers / hard plastics we were seeing before. I will point out that the grip we saw before, as a matter of fact, I should probably just go ahead. This guy supposedly is the model of 1896 grip, which should be on the early versions of this gun, and yet I never see it that way. So I'm more confident in saying that you should see this grip on an 1896, and you almost always do. As a matter of fact, these are far easier to find than any of these unbroken. Internally, there are a couple minor differences by the time of the 1896. This guy right here, as you can see with the breech block up, is actually the base of a flat spring that extends in the action. If you looked at our animation last time, you know that you have that cam plate in there that I can actually, yep, see that guy springing and it wants to click back down. Previously, its little flat spring was riveted to the plate itself. Now it's actually in the breech block acting on a stud on the cam plate. Simpler construction, simpler to replace if it happens to break. Actually, rather lovely change. We'll also find a distinct difference here in the slide action. I removed the plate, and as you can see, something's poking through this time. If I remove this guy, without having to take the whole gun apart, I can just show you here, that's become a roller instead of a fixed stud, which should smooth things out rather nicely. Okay, not a big change. The next modification to turn up is what's known as the model 1899, mostly because some very, very few examples have turned up with exactly that stamped on their receivers. Unfortunately, I don't have an example here, nor do I have the rights to any photos. However, great news, because the model right after that, the model of 1900, is all but identical. And I do happen to have one of those here. So let's get a closer look. Now at a glance, the differences are fairly minor. This guy, if we scroll on forward, we're going to see, oh yeah, that guy stands out. And then, not much on the butt, but if I flip her over and you're very eagle-eyed, you may see that the shape of this has changed. Let's actually focus on that. While we're here, my example is a 1900, although this feature starts to appear on the 1899s. It seems to be the first step in easing takedown. If you loosen this lower screw, which I've already done, and then remove the upper, instead of having to remove both screws, we can just pull out the one. To be honest with you, I don't know why they didn't make this sort of like a 90-degree key. But with just the one screw to be lost, we can actually tip the plate. Oh, maybe I need to loosen that a little bit more. We can actually tip the plate out of our way. There we go. And that will allow us to take out our slide action. And when you put it back in, you have to make sure to push everything down because it does dovetail under there. I suspect people losing the plate was more important than losing the screws to the factory, because I have a suspicion those plates were fairly hand fit, and the way they're dovetailed under, trying to replace one for an unhappy customer is probably a nightmare. They probably had to send in the whole gun for replacement. This is all speculation on my point, but it's the best explanation I have for why they made this change. And all their changes to 1899 are unfortunately unknown to me. There's so few of them known. There's only a handful of photos out there that I have access to. So if someone has an example and wants to explore what else might be different other than that change, please let me know. But for the 1900, we have some very big additions. You can tell we no longer want to have to use tools to take the gun down, which means that this screw was replaced with a big old flag that we can then rotate all the way off. So unfortunately, it is still the full experience. We'll get that guy all the way separated. And then we can remove this guy from... wait, what happened there? They pressed the end of the magazine to retain the follower. And if you want to properly take apart this magazine now, you'll have to remove the cross key and disassemble everything from the front. This capsule system is a lot smarter. All right, we can just go ahead and get this guy out of our way by pumping him back. There we go. And to remove the barrel, we just need to turn this down 90 degrees. It kind of helps to pick it up away from the receiver and then twist. And then at the bottom stroke, we should be able to start rotating that barrel loose, which is in theory what I was supposed to be able to do with that 1890 we played with earlier, but that thing had been staked. So if I just keep at this for a couple hours. Now, I would say that this isn't the worst takedown system I've seen for a shotgun, but the example I'm thinking of that's worse is the previous Spencers and Bannerman. So, okay, not ideal, but at least far less likely to get lost, other than, boy, don't let that screw escape. I mean, look at him trying to get out already. You could, in theory, take this guy and connect it here in order to keep that screw from wandering, but then you have this very loose connection. You'd really want to tie that with some leather or twine so that it does not get bent up this way. However, it is compact, it is portable, and it is doable as an individual without any tools on hand. Unfortunately, by 1900, this is very much a catch-up system. There are so many cool takedowns available even by this point. With the barrel off, it's actually easier to show you the other addition on this system, which is dual extractors. So right there, that guy's just serving as an extractor, and there's our usual push-pull guy. In order to accommodate this, by the way, you can see the breech block has been modified to have, well, the front little edge of the left-hand rise cut down, and then a path cut into it for that extractor to disappear inside of. Let me see if I can get this guy set back up without pinching my little piggies. And then, yeah, we'll pump on back. All right, having reset the system, there we go. Just right there, we can see it working. So there's our second extractor doing its job. And then, it actually gets sucked in, which is not in our animation, so I wanted to show it to you. She's out, and you'll see her get sucked in. And what's happening is, it's just a pivoting plate right here. So that's the little back end of him, like a teeter-totter, getting sucked up under that guy. And then, boom, she pops back out of her own way. Fun fact on these, while I have this in this position, One of the most common ways to see a Spencer get damaged is the slack will go out of this guy for whatever reason. He just won't want to tuck in at the back end. And once that happens, the backside of this will get slammed up against that breech block, bent forward, and then from there it just keeps happening worse and worse. So when you're operating one of these for the first time, do pay very close attention to one of these guys, even when you're dry cycling. Cartridges actually tend to hold it out of the way. But dry cycling, don't let it get smacked up against that breech block, flipped around, and then broken, because boy, is it a pain to weld that thin little action bar to fix a problem like that. Given that this is the final form of the Spencer shotgun, I suggest we at least take it for an additional spin. So let's hand it over to Mae. Honestly, it looks about the same, and I don't know that I noticed the extra extraction, but it's still cool. While discussing the 1900, I should also mention that in January of that year, Bannerman's appeal failed in the courts. Ultimately, he wasted some $7,000 attempting to defend his patent. In the meantime, Winchester had advanced their design to the model of 1897, the now famed mold-setting pump-action shotgun, which sold units into the millions over nearly a century. Overall, it's estimated that just over 21,000 Spencer shotguns of all types were ever produced. Just for comparison, the less popular Winchester 1893 sold about 34,000 units until the more popular 1897 was released. So, not a great showing by Spencer or Bannerman. Ultimately, Bannerman chose to sell the entire production line. He listed it in his own catalog in early 1902. His given reason is that a surplus of Spanish-American war spoils and other opportunities has made his core business so profitable that he had no time to attend to the still very profitable Spencer shotgun endeavor. Frankly, Francis Bannerman's most famous years were actually to come after this debacle. His wealth would grow so much that he'd invest in his own island castle. Who actually bought the Spencer production line remains something of a mystery. Sears certainly made an offer, as they expected to buy the line through their partner Colton Manufacturing, who were producing discount break actions specifically for the Sears catalog, which some people didn't want to sell too cheaply. It seems they went as far as incorporating a new business, Union Firearms Company, in nearby New Jersey, despite Colton working in Toledo, Ohio at the time. Ultimately, the deal fell through, though, so Union Firearms began producing their own shotguns. These are most famously known for their Model 24, a mysterious gun that can't be tied to a known patent, at least by me. It's worth noting, like the Spencer, it kept the hammer spur inside the trigger guard. Bannerman continued to list the plant for sale until at least 1907. I suspect it was liquidated to a producer of something other than firearms. Before we finish up, let me leave you with a little mystery. The last of the military contracts should have come as a 70-unit lot in 1893. However, here is a photo from the 1914 U.S. occupation of Veracruz. Note the sailor on the right with what seems to be a Bannerman model of 1896 shotgun, complete with bandolier of 12-gauge cartridges. Was this perhaps a direct order by a ship's captain? And how surprising to find it so many years later. Whew, okay, we made it through the history. All that's left is to get Mae's opinion on the Bannerman and Spencer shotguns. All right, once more, we made room for Mae.
Hi.
And we have 2 shotguns to talk about because I split this episode weird. I'm really sorry, guys. This is the best way to even it out.
That's fair.
We have our Bannerman, which ended in the 1900, which is the one I have here.
Yep.
But for the moment, let's talk about the Spencer one last time.
Okay.
So we got very lucky in that we have a 30-inch barrel 1886 that was here. And it appears that either a 30 or 32-inch barrel 1886 is what the Army tested. So we went ahead and loaded up some black powder buckshot rounds to really get as much comparison as we could out of the gun. Mm-hmm. And how did that go for you? Because these were paper, 2 5/8, 9 pellet buck.
Yeah. And I had just come off of shooting bird off of this one, actually.
Right.
So for the bird, I'm thinking, oh, this is light. It's nice and sweet and doing my job.
I mean, technically, I think we did bird shot and then bird shot, and then we shot a third shotgun bird shot. Then we turned around and said, okay, buckshot time. And we actually had some rifles to film.
Yes.
So, problem on that in a second. But in terms of actually pumping the action, any difference?
Between this and that one? Or
the bird shot and the buckshot.
Bird shot and the buckshot. No real difference that I could perceive, actually, that I recall.
What about the boom?
Definitely different. Recoil went from mild to moderate, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Did you feel cool?
You know what? There was a lot of smoke. Yeah. That was beautiful, actually. And I love the smell, too, that came with that wafted back into my face.
Now, our birdshot cartridges are light load smokeless because it can handle it, and that's a whole other thing to be loading up a bunch of smokeless birdshot just to demonstrate the shotguns in this series. However, we went with black powder on the buckshot so that we get you the full effect, because that's always cool.
Oh, yeah.
So
tons of smoke everywhere, in and out of the action.
Sound.
Yes.
I was pleasantly surprised at how there was no smoke out of the action until the cartridge was broken free.
Yeah, so it was sealed in there. I guess it was just like kind of, probably maybe made it into the carrier some, and but otherwise it feels like it kind of just concealed it in there.
Yeah, that's nice. Because the metallic base and its rim act as the gas check. This breech block is extremely...
Oh, so it wouldn't have even made it into the carrier then, because the face of the breech would have just been keeping it capsulated.
Yeah, as long as you have the chamber good and the cartridges are good, there should be no failure. Excellent. If there was a failure of the cartridge, which the Army did test, it would have blown vertically up and down, and not at you, the shooter, because this has the breech block. It's a tilting breech block.
The pivot point essentially means that it would, no matter what, protect me from any sort of exposure.
It's extremely comparable to a Martini Henry. I mean, you could almost think of this as a pump action Martini Henry in many ways.
Okay.
Not a perfect analogy, but very close.
Sure.
So
that was kind of neat. I can't say I felt that much difference, if any, on extraction, really.
Not at first, but over time, that black powder starts to stack up.
That's the problem, is that eventually, it's just because of the fouling, that it would just become a progressive issue as time went on.
Yes, however...
That's expected.
In the 5 rounds we shot, not nearly problem enough.
Not too bad, no.
And then performance on target.
Well... So we're kind of stupid.
Right.
We set the target out originally at 70 yards because we planned on shooting rifles that day. Not really remembering.
Well, we did shoot rifles.
We did. Not really remembering or thinking or on the fact that we were also going to be shooting shotguns at it.
Traditionally, we've shot shotguns out of buckshot, or buckshot out of shotguns at 50 yards because getting 100 yards out of a buckshot shotgun is ambitious.
Well, 70 is what we do the rifles at.
Yeah, we tend to do the rifles at 70 because that was the limitation of the first range we shot on, and now we've kept everything consistent. Also, we're shooting from standing, which is very difficult to shoot at 100 yards standing consistently over and over again when you film like 5-6 rifles in a day.
Yeah, it can be a little tiring.
Yeah, so we've just done 70. It's just a general idea of what it's like to hold at the rifle. We're shooting the rifles in their worst position because it gives you a sense for their balance and everything else.
Yep.
Same with the shotgun. We're not going to bury the shotgun on the table in order to shoot. We're just going to stand and send it.
Yeah.
Previously, we've shot at 50 yards for buckshot because it's a much better representation of where you would use buckshot. We just sort of forgot and left our target at 70.
So, like, we got, like, almost 30 holes in that thing.
Was it 29, you said?
I think it was 29, if I remember correctly.
If it was 29, that's a hit rate of 64-something%.
Because there were 5 rounds in total.
Right.
Yeah, so 45.
Yeah, 5 times 9, 45. Yeah, 29 over 45.
Yeah.
So...
Not too bad.
No, the Army was getting at a much closer range. Mm-hmm. The Army at the time was getting something like an 80% hit rate in a rapid fire test. But it was a rapid fire test.
Yeah, we didn't do rapid fire.
But, it plays in that. You're taking more time. You're more experienced at this with the pump actions and everything. So, yeah, okay, so I'll say 60.
No, it's not too bad.
No, it's 70 yards to have 60+% hit rate on individual pellets. I mean, that's every shot likely hit to some degree because you're talking about 9 pellets each shot.
I'm also guessing, too, because if you look at the target, some of them look like they're up on each other, too. Like there might be 2 holes there instead of 1, but
so
it's
it would have
kind
been
of
an
hard.
overlay of the pattern.
It looks like I can't quite tell necessarily.
Yeah.
So I'm erring on the side of caution and I'm underselling the number potentially.
Well, is that confidence inspiring though? That you would be able to use that at up to 70 yards?
Yeah, I'd certainly say that's confidence inspiring.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that we managed to get that many. Now that I thought about it because I went and looked at the target. I was like, God, that's not that great. I really thought I was going to do better at 50, and then it hit me, and I went, not 50. That's not bad. I'd be curious to see what it did at 100 now.
You can see why people wanted to bring pump action shotguns to the trenches of World War I just by playing with the very first pump action shotgun.
Yeah, pretty legal.
Now the military did adopt it in very limited numbers for prison guards.
Okay.
Which with a surprisingly large barrel.
What do you mean? Like they had over 30?
Yeah, 30. The ones that have turned up that are military marked, which is all, I mean, the data is so limited, folks. I haven't gone and proven all this out. We're just doing an episode every 2 weeks here.
All right.
But the ones that have turned up tend to be long barreled like this one.
Okay.
Which is kind of a weird choice. You'd think that they'd have 20-inch barrels like a riot gun. But it appears that might have been something that came along a little bit later.
Huh.
So, anyway.
Good to know.
That's really all we got. There's only a few hundred that were bought. It's really still a commercial arm. It's just interesting to see what it could do with some buckshot. This also hits at the heart of sort of, I want to point something out that we're going to see going forward as we talk about more shotguns. Over and over again, we're going to see that the European market rejects the repeating shotgun. They just don't really care for it all that much. And they really reject the early semi-automatic shotguns.
Okay.
The U.S. tends to love repeating shotguns, pump actions, and later semi-automatics. Love them. Because in the U.S., for an American who at that time was very penny pinching, having something that could go out and chase birds out of the sky for food and sport, that could go chase ground animals off the ground for food and sport, that could chase larger
or for sales for pelts.
Yeah, that's true. Well, to a limited degree, but yeah. And then it could chase larger game with buckshot that you can then eat, sell, whatever you want to do. But also the magazine capacity, yes, we talked about it last time as being pre-game limits, sure. But also the magazine capacity is something that we immediately understand as Americans as a defensive tool. So as much as this is a sporting shotgun, this 5-round capacity and this need to sort of be able to get through your rounds quickly is both a mass hunting advantage and a defense advantage. And Americans still to this day really enjoy that defense advantage. Yeah. And so for a lot of families, the shotgun became synonymous with both hunting and gathering and personal defense. In Europe, it was sport primarily.
Right.
And
so why would they need defense with that?
It was already sport. So it was already, even before the game limits, it was already sort of a thing like, well, why do you need all that?
Right.
And then it wasn't used as a personal defense thing on the regular in the sort of mentality of the American. And they weren't going around bagging hundreds of badgers or whatever they were doing.
Right.
So it really split the market. And we'll actually see a number of shotguns that try to cross those market lines in the future of our series. And it almost to this day is still the same, which is very interesting. And it kind of starts with this gun. It's another fun fact that this guy starts sort of this division. This is sort of the splitting axe of the American and the European shotgun sensibility.
Okay.
All right. So with that in mind, let's look at the ultimate Bannerman.
Ultimate Bannerman.
We have an 1890 here. Unfortunately, my 1890 is somebody messed up the extractor at one point, like I was talking about with that stuff earlier. So it doesn't always reliably extract. We have an 1896, which is really just like this, so we might as well shoot this.
Okay.
So we shot the ultimate. We went from sort of the beginnings all the way to the end. We only ran birdshot through that.
Correct.
Was it remarkable in any way compared to its predecessor?
Well, I mean, it's remarkable in that, hooray, so that I had the tiny grip before that I was complaining about on the pump, and now they have expanded it. I really do like that. It is very comfortable with these nice ridges cut into it. They're very soft and tapered. I like that.
So you would say it's ribbed?
It is ribbed.
No, never mind. Keep going.
What?
Nothing.
What are you going on?
Keep going.
Okay. appearance-wise, it looks like it has extra stuff going on in that it's got levers now.
It's got little keys.
Little keys, yep. Uh-huh. And then I know because, I knew to look out for it. It has a second little extractor hook on the other side.
You'd barely notice if you didn't look for it.
I can't say I would have necessarily noticed it. The comb feels slightly different.
The comb seems to be more square. It's thicker at the top.
Yeah.
And maybe more proud. But put it up on your shoulder. How's it feel?
Maybe a little more proud? Yeah, a little bit, maybe. Yeah, I do feel a little higher up, maybe. But not that much.
It's not.
Not that much.
If you had to just grab each of these and shoot them other than the pump, would you notice a difference?
Probably not. Okay. Not inherently so. They feel very much the same. They look very much similar, so I don't think I would have perceived a difference between the two necessarily.
And there has been no mechanical simplification between the two. As a matter of fact,
correct.
The changes have been additional mechanics, cross keys, the roller bearing on the left side, the extra extractor. We're adding stuff to the mix, not taking away.
And that maybe, I think maybe if this one's clean, whenever it's cleaned up, it feels a little smoother on the pump back. Maybe.
So that's the problem with this, is this one actually is in very good shape. I know the outside looks a little rough, but internally there's almost no nicks or scratches or dents. Even though it's a solid lug on the action bar, it's very smooth. It hasn't been cycled 10,000 times.
Right.
That one, somebody was using it. And it runs, by the way, it runs like a tank.
It does. It definitely runs. I wasn't as accurate with it, though, unfortunately.
No, and that may actually have something to do with the way it was supported.
What do you mean?
The breech block on that one rises just a little bit more than this one, and I suspect that's because the camway is slowly wearing out.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, but the thing is, it's still in enough alignment for the firing pin to hit, so it hits a little off-center, so it may not have full support. But, you still smoked all the glaze. Did you? I don't think you had a miss on this one either.
No, I did have a miss on this one.
It's kind of surprising because there's not really a significant difference between the guns. Same barrel length, same action. The grip's actually better on that one.
Oh, yeah. I'm actually very happy with that grip change-up. But I think I remember correctly, this one I think stuck a little bit more weirdly.
Yeah, but sticking shouldn't be a problem once it's up on your shoulder.
No, it shouldn't be. And visually, it doesn't seem like...
frustrated with it?
Maybe, I don't know. I can't perceive why I had a miss on that one, but...
It's not major for the show, so I don't want to go chasing it down. But the honest truth is, like we mentioned last time, crown could be messed up.
It could
be. That gun, I did not sit down and pattern that one. I was so focused on the earlier one that this is the one I really worked in because we had to shoot this one. I haven't patterned that one.
That's fair.
So we might find that it has an offset pattern because it's got some damage to the muzzle because somebody put a slug or two through it back in the day or something that they shouldn't have done with that heavy, sort of super full choke.
Right.
So... who knows?
Yeah, no
the good news is they both function roughly the same. Was there any perceivable difference in the pump strength or anything like that? Did the roller add anything for you?
I thought maybe in the very initial beginning of the pump that it felt a little bit smoother, maybe. But the problem is that, God, when you're on range and you're shooting it, you really it's too minute to really kind of pick it up,
That's fair. And then the takedown features, did you enjoy those at least?
Yes, because I took it down on range and completely disassembled it right then and there. No.
Yeah, that's
I like the idea that maybe they've made the disassembly easier. I like the idea that they were trying to make the disassembly on this a little bit easier.
The extra takedown features, did they get in your way as the shooter? Did you notice them?
No, I didn't notice them.
Okay, well, that's good then. You got some added benefit for no distraction.
Yeah, pretty much. That's always a good benefit for the shooter.
Now, 1900 is fairly late.
Yeah.
That's going to be after the introduction of the Winchester 1893 and 97.
Okay.
That's going to be after the introduction of the Burgess.
Sure.
You fired those guns. Not that we've done it on this show yet, but you fired them.
Sure.
Would you rank this above them?
Definitely below the Winchester 97. Can't even remotely put that above that.
She loves her 97.
Maybe above the Burgess, maybe.
It's kind of hard to tell. We haven't done our episode on the Burgess yet, but...
they keep breaking for some reason.
We're talking about the long Burgess now. Everybody knows the folder, but we're talking about... the folders were a small subsection of production.
Right.
The full-size shotgun, we've worked with them before. Without giving too much away, I suspect that the Burgess has an inherent design flaw, which is part of why it never really took off.
And the Burgess, I'd still argue there's a timing that's required for that one for working the action. It's a bit strange.
Yeah, it's almost like an alien system, so you have to get used to it before calling it. But I actually, weirdly, having dealt with Burgesses now and dealt with these guys, it takes a lot less effort to bring one of these into repair than it does a Burgess.
Oh, yeah.
And these things are tanks by comparison. If I had to choose between the two to own, not thinking future value of everybody wanting one.
Of just specifically shooting.
Yeah, the utility.
Yeah.
These utility.
And
so
sound.
good.
So good.
All right.
That's pretty much it, though.
Yeah, I think that's kind of covered.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts on these guys?
I mean, I'm glad we at least had this one to test out. I was hoping the roller was going to add some more benefit to that function of the weird, awkward breech slap sensation that you get. But no, it really didn't change that much at all.
I genuinely have a deep love and appreciation for the Spencer shotgun. I think, did it perfectly nail what a pump action shotgun is?
No.
But it's the first, and as far as a first thing goes,
pretty freaking good.
Yeah, I mean, is it a perfect home run? No. But, oh my, it's so much better performance than you would expect.
Yeah.
If you told me this is the first commercial pump-action shotgun, I would not think that it would be this. And by the way, just looking at it with the screws and everything, I mean, it's very industrial looking.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like a madhouse. With my experience in firearms, this many screws and pins ultimately mean a disaster. There should be stuff that's sort of gone oblong and off. No, it works.
Yeah, it really did.
It works really well. All right, well, I guess that's it for today.
Yeah, I think so.
So thank you again to all the patrons for supporting the show.
Thanks, guys.
Join them if you'd like to, but otherwise, tune in next time.
Good night, everybody.
I've really wanted to cover a Lao Type 13 for a while, which is, I have one, but all of them in the U.S. market,
right,
I don't have their dust covers.
Mm-hmm.
So Bruno and I are looking at modeling the gun well enough to make a dust cover. I thought it would be better to make a pressing, because then, frankly, if anybody else wanted one, I could send them I could just sell the pressings. Now, they wouldn't be finished because you'd have to trim and bend the final pieces yourself, because I ain't got time for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the only problem is I found out that's exorbitantly expensive, at least from the one guy that mentioned it to me.
With the bank branch manager near us, and he was just like, you started making me think about guns more. I was like, what? And he was like, I was looking at these reproduction Colts, and I was like, what reproduction Colts are you looking at? And then he showed me. I was like, oh, you're getting into black powder? And he went, oh wait, this is black powder? And I was like, yeah, it's got
percussion nipples
right there. You can put caps on that. And he went, oh, never mind.
I've asked the Colt guys that I know, but I don't know a lot of Colt guys, just a few. Most Colt guys actually tend to not be internet guys. So if anybody happens to know where the wood and brass Colt 1889 speed loader is, I would love to photograph one, because I don't even have...
some good photography would be nice.
I can't find a single color photo of one. I can find a color photo of the wood dowel. Somebody found one and sold it in the past 10 years.
Dang.
But color photos of this thing at all. Here's our gun. Coming from the Spencer, we have one big advantage, which is that I can take a dummy cartridge and load it whenever I want, even with the action closed. If I want to get the action open, I cannot just pump away. I actually have to come up here and pump forward. More on why in a moment. And then once I pump forward, I can then pump